That next day, that is, the same Sunday on which Stepan Trofimovich's fate was to be irrevocably decided, was one of the most portentous days in my chronicle. It was a day of the unexpected, a day of the unraveling of the old and the raveling up of the new, a day of sharp explanations and of a still greater muddle. In the morning, as the reader already knows, I was obliged to accompany my friend to Varvara Petrovna's, at her own stipulation, and by 3 in the afternoon I had to be at Lizaveta Nikolaevna's in order to tell her about what I did not know and to assist her in what I did not know. And yet it all resolved itself in a way no one could have imagined. In short, it was a day of surprisingly converging accidents. It all began when Stepan Trofimovich and I, having come to Varvara Petrovna's at exactly 12 o'clock, as she herself had stipulated, did not find her at home. She had not yet returned from the Sunday liturgy. My poor friend was so disposed, or better, so indisposed, that this circumstance instantly crushed him. Almost powerlessly, he lowered himself into an armchair in the drawing room. I offered him a glass of water, but despite his paleness and even the trembling of his hands, he declined it with dignity. Incidentally, his outfit this time was distinguished by its remarkable elegance, a shirt almost fit for a ball, cambric embroidered, a white tie, a new hat in his hand, fresh straw-colored gloves, and even just a touch of perfume. No sooner had we sat down than Shatov entered, shown in by the valet, also clearly on official invitation. Stepan Trofimovich rose slightly to offer him his hand, but Shatov, after looking at the two of us attentively, turned to the corner, sat down there, and did not even nod to us. Stepan Trofimovich again looked at me timorously. We sat for a few more minutes in complete silence. Stepan Trofimovich suddenly began to whisper something to me very quickly, but I did not hear, and he himself was so agitated that he dropped it without finishing. The valet came in again to straighten something on the table, or rather to have a look at us. Shatov suddenly addressed him with a loud question. Alexei Yegorovitch, do you know whether Darya Pavlovna went with her? Varvara Petrovna went to the cathedral alone, if you please, sir, and Darya Pavlovna stayed in her room upstairs as she is feeling somewhat unwell, Alexei Yegorovitch reported didactically and decorously. Decorously. I think that's how you pronounce it. My poor friend again glanced at me furtively and anxiously, so that I finally began to turn away from him. Suddenly a carriage clattered up to the entrance, and a certain distant commotion in the house informed us that the hostess had come back. We all jumped up from our chairs. Then another unexpected thing. The sound of many steps was heard, which meant that the hostess had not come back alone, and that was indeed somewhat strange, since she herself had stipulated this hour to us. Finally, there came the sound as of someone entering with a strange quickness, almost running, a way in which Varvara Petrovna could not have entered. And suddenly she all but flew into the room, breathless and extremely excited. Following a little behind her and much more slowly, Lizaveta Nikolaevna came in arm with Lizaveta Nikolaevna, Maria Timofeyevna Lebyedkin. If I had seen it in a dream, even then I would not have believed it. To explain this totally unexpected thing, it is necessary to go back an hour and tell in more detail than usual about the remarkable adventure that had befallen Varvara Petrovna at the cathedral. First of all, nearly the whole town had gathered for the liturgy, meaning that is, the upper stratum of our society. It was known that the governor's wife would be coming for the first time since her arrival here. I will note that there were already rumors among us that she was a free thinker and of, quote, the new principles, end of quote. It was also known to all the ladies that she would be dressed magnificently and with remarkable elegance, and therefore Our Lady's costumes this time were distinguished by their refinement and splendor. Varvara Petrovna alone was, as usual, modestly dressed all in black. She had dressed thus invariably over the last 4 years. Coming to the cathedral, she settled in her usual place to the left in the first row, and the liveried footman placed in front of her a velvet cushion for kneeling. In short, all was as usual. But it was also noticed that this time, all through the service, she prayed somewhat extremely zealously. It was even affirmed later, when everything was recalled, that tears even brimmed her eyes. Finally, the liturgy ended, and our priest, Father Pavel, came out to deliver a solemn sermon. In our town, his sermons were loved and highly valued. He had even been urged to publish them, but he could not make up his mind. This time the sermon came out somehow especially long. And so it was that during the sermon, a certain lady drove up to the cathedral in a light hired droshky of the old style, the kind on which a lady could only sit sideways, holding onto the driver's belt and swaying with the jolting of the carriage like a blade of grass in the wind. Such cabbies are still driving about in our town. Stopping at the corner of the cathedral, for there were many carriages and even mounted police standing by the gates. The lady jumped down from the droshky and handed the driver 4 silver kopecks. What, isn't that enough for you? She cried out, seeing the face he made. It's all I have, she added pitifully. Well, God be with you. I took you without bargaining. The cabby waved his hand, looking at her as if thinking, and it would be a sin to offend you. Then he stuffed his leather purse into his bosom, touched up his horse, and drove off, followed by the jeers of the nearby cabbies. Jeers and even surprise also accompanied the lady all the while she was making her way to the cathedral gates amid the carriages and lackeydom awaiting their soon-to-emerge masters. Lackeydom. And indeed, there was something unusual and unexpected for everyone in such a person suddenly appearing out of nowhere in the street among people. She was sickly thin and limped a little. Her face was painted with white makeup and rouge. Her long neck was completely bared with no kerchief or cloak. And she was wearing only a dark old dress, despite the cold, windy, though clear September day. Her head was completely uncovered, her hair tied at the nape in a tiny knot, into the right side of which a single artificial rose was stuck, of the sort used to decorate Palm Sunday cherubs. I had noticed precisely such a Palm Sunday cherub with a wreath of paper roses in the corner under the icons the day before, when I was sitting at Maria Timofeyevna's. To crown it all, the lady, though she walked with modestly lowered eyes, was at the same time smiling gaily and coyly. If she had lingered a bit longer, she might not have been allowed into the cathedral, but she managed to slip in and, entering the church, pushed her way inconspicuously to the front. Though the sermon was at its midpoint and the entire packed crowd that filled the church was listening with full and hushed attention, nevertheless, a few eyes glanced sideways with curiosity and bewilderment at the woman who had just entered. She dropped down on the church dais, lowered her whitened face to it, and lay there for a long time, apparently weeping. But having raised her head and gotten up from her knees, she very soon recovered and became distracted. Gaily, with obviously extreme pleasure, she let her eyes roam from face to face and around the cathedral walls. She stared with special curiosity at some of the ladies, even standing on tiptoe to do so, and even laughing a couple of times with a sort of strange giggle. But the sermon came to an end and the cross was brought out. The governor's wife was the first to go up to the cross, but within 2 steps of it she stopped, apparently wishing to give way to Varvara Petrovna, who was approaching it from her own side all too directly and as if not noticing anyone ahead of her. The extraordinary courtesy of the governor's wife undoubtedly contained an obvious and, in its way, witty barb, so everyone understood it. So Varvara Petrovna must have understood it. But as before, not noticing anyone, and with a most unshakable air of dignity, she kissed the cross and at once headed for the exit. The liveried footman cleared the way, though people were all parting before her even without that. But right at the exit on the porch, her way was momentarily blocked by a closely packed crowd. Varvara Petrovna paused, and suddenly a strange, extraordinary being, a woman with a paper rose in her hair, squeezed through the people and knelt in front of her. Varvara Petrovna was not easily perplexed by anything, especially in public, so she looked at her imposingly and sternly. I hasten to note here, as briefly as possible, that although Varvara Petrovna had in recent years become exceedingly economical, as they said, and even a bit stingy, still she could on occasion be unsparing of money for charity proper. She was a member of a charitable society in the capital. In a recent famine year, she had sent 500 rubles to Petersburg, to the main committee for the receipt of aid for the victims, and this was talked about in town. Finally, quite recently, before the appointment of the new governor, she had all but established a local ladies' committee to aid the poorest new mothers in our town and in the province. She was severely reproached among us for being ambitious, but the notorious impetuousness of Varvara Petrovna's character, together with her persistence, nearly triumphed over the obstacles. The society was almost set up, and the initial idea broadened more and more in the delighted mind of the foundress. She was already dreaming of establishing a similar committee in Moscow, of gradually expanding its activities throughout all the provinces. And then, with the sudden change of governors, everything came to a halt, and the new governor's wife, it was said, had already managed to utter in society a few pointed and, above all, apt and sensible objections regarding the supposed impracticability of the basic idea of such a committee, which, with embellishments, of course, had already been passed on to Varvara Petrovna. God alone knows what's hidden in men's hearts, but I suppose it was even with a certain pleasure that Varvara Petrovna now paused at the very gates of the cathedral, knowing that the governor's wife would pass by presently, and then everyone else, and, quote, let her see for herself how it makes no difference to me what she thinks or what further witticism she may produce concerning the vanity of my charitable works. Take that, all of you, end of quote. What is it, my dear? What do you ask? Varvara Petrovna looked more attentively at the petitioner kneeling before her. The latter looked at her with terribly timid, abashed, but almost adoring eyes, and suddenly smiled with the same strange giggle. What is she? Who is she? Varvara Petrovna glanced around at everyone there with a peremptory, inquisitive look. They were all silent. You are unfortunate. You are in need of assistance. I've come, the unfortunate woman prattled, in a voice breaking with excitement. I've come just to kiss your hand. And she giggled again, with a most childlike look, as when children are being affectionate in order to beg for something. She reached out to seize Varvara Petrovna's hand, but suddenly, as though frightened, she jerked her hands back. You've come just for that, Varvara Petrovna smiled a compassionate smile, but at once quickly took her mother-of-pearl purse from her pocket, took a 10-ruble bill from it, and gave it to the unknown woman. The latter took it. Varvara Petrovna was very interested and apparently did not consider the unknown woman as some common petitioner. 10 rubles she gave her, someone said in the crowd. Your hand, please, prattled the unfortunate woman, firmly grasping with the fingers of her left hand the corner of the received 10-ruble bill, which was twirling in the wind. Varvara Petrovna frowned slightly for some reason, and with a serious, almost stern look, held out her hand. The woman kissed it adoringly. Her grateful eyes even shone with some sort of rapture. Just at that moment, the governor's wife drew near, and the whole crowd of our ladies and senior dignitaries came pouring after her. The governor's wife had unwillingly to stop for a moment in the crush. Many people stopped. You're shivering. Are you cold? Varvara Petrovna suddenly noticed, and throwing off her cloak, which was caught in midair by the footman, she took from her shoulders her black, far from inexpensive, shawl, and with her own hands wrapped it around the bare neck of the still kneeling petitioner. But do get up from your knees, I beg you. The woman got up. Where do you live? Doesn't anyone at least know where she lives? Varvara Petrovna again glanced around impatiently, but the former little crowd was no longer there. She saw familiar society faces gazing at the scene, some with stern surprise, others with sly curiosity, and at the same time with an innocent desire for a bit of scandal, while still others even began to titter. Seems she's one of the Lebyatkins, ma'am. One good man finally stepped forward to answer Varvara Petrovna's question. Our venerable and widely respected merchant, Andreev, gray-bearded, bespectacled, in Russian dress, and with a round, cylindrical hat, which he was now holding in his hands. She lives at Filipov's house, on Bogoyevolinsky Street. Lebyatkin? Filipov's house. I've heard something. Thank you, Nikon Semyonich. But who is this Lebyatkin? They call him a captain, an imprudent man, I'd have to say, and this is his sister, right enough. It seems she's escaped from under supervision, Nikon Semyonich said, lowering his voice and giving Varvara Petrovna a significant look. I understand. Thank you, Nikon Semyonich. So, my dear, you are Miss Lebyatkin? No, I'm not Miss Lebyatkin. Then perhaps your brother is Lebyatkin? My brother is Lebyatkin. Here's what I'll do. I'll take you with me, my dear, and from my house you'll be driven to your family. Would you like to come with me? Ah, yes, I would, Miss Lebyatkin clapped her hands. Auntie, take me with you too, cried the voice of Lizaveta Nikolaevna. I will note that Lizaveta Nikolaevna had come to the liturgy with the governor's wife, and that Praskovia Ivanovna, on doctor's orders, had meanwhile gone for a ride in a carriage, taking Mavriky Nikolaevich along for diversion. Liza suddenly abandoned the governor's wife and sprang over to Varvara Petrovna. My dear, you know I'm always glad to have you, but what will your mother say? Varvara Petrovna began imposingly, but suddenly became confused, seeing Liza's extraordinary agitation. Auntie, I must come with you now, Liza begged, kissing Varvara Petrovna. But what is the matter with you, Liza? The governor's wife said with emphatic surprise. Forgive me, my dear, cherished cousin. I'm going to my aunt's. Liza turned in mid-flight to her unpleasantly surprised, cherished cousin and kissed her twice. And tell Mama to come at once to fetch me at Auntie's? Mama really wanted to come. She told me so today. I forgot to tell you. Liza kept on rattling. It's not my fault. Don't be angry. Julie, my cherished cousin, Auntie, I'm ready. If you don't take me with you, Auntie, I'll run screaming after your carriage, she whispered quickly and desperately right into Varvara Petrovna's ear. Luckily, no one else heard it. Varvara Petrovna even started back a step and gave the mad girl a piercing look. This look decided everything. She resolved definitely to take Liza with her. We must put an end to this, escaped from her. Very well, Liza, I shall take you with pleasure. She at once added loudly, if Yulia Mikhailovna consents to let you go, of course. She turned directly to the governor's wife, with an open look and straightforward dignity. Oh, I certainly would not want to deprive her of that pleasure, the less so in that I myself, Yulia Mikhailovna suddenly began prattling with surprising amiability. I myself, well, know what a fantastic domineering little head we have on our pretty shoulders. Yulia Mikhailovna smiled charmingly. I thank you greatly, Varvara Petrovna thanked her with a polite and imposing bow. And it is all the more pleasant, Yulia Mikhailovna went on with her prattling, now almost enraptured, even blushing all over with pleasant excitement, that besides the delight of visiting you, Liza has been carried away by such a beautiful, such a, I might say, lofty feeling, compassion. She glanced at the unfortunate woman. And right on the porch of the church, such a view does you honor, Varvara Petrovna approved magnificently. Yulia Mikhailovna impetuously offered her hand, and Varvara Petrovna, with perfect readiness, touched it with her fingers. The general impression was excellent. The faces of some of those present began to beam with pleasure. Several sweet and fawning smiles appeared. In short, it was suddenly revealed clearly to the whole town that it was not Yulia Mikhailovna who had scorned Varvara Petrovna all along and had not paid her a visit, but on the contrary, it was Varvara Petrovna herself who had, quote, kept Yulia Mikhailovna within bounds, when she would perhaps have run on foot to visit her if only she had been sure that Varvara Petrovna would not chase her away, end of quote. Varvara Petrovna's prestige rose in the extreme. Do get in, my dear, Varvara Petrovna motioned Mademoiselle Lebyadkin to the carriage that had driven up. The, quote, unfortunate, end of quote, woman ran joyfully to the door, where a footman caught her up. What, you're lame? Varvara Petrovna cried out, as if totally frightened, and turned pale. Everyone noticed it at the time, but did not understand. The carriage drove off. Varvara Petrovna's house was quite near the cathedral. Liza told me later that Miss Lebyadkin laughed hysterically for all 3 minutes of the ride, while Varvara Petrovna sat as if in some magnetic sleep. Liza's own expression.